this is the Laura and Jeff show. Laura is going to begin and share some things, and then maybe I'll chime in a bit later. But and we really would invite your questions. Laura has anticipated anything that you could possibly want to know, and she has the perfect answer for it.
I don't know that.
Of course, that's a matter of opinion.
Well,
That is true.
so go ahead. Why don't you start us off?
Sure. I'll just start by telling my story, and then we'll just open it up to discussion. Okay? So, in the eyes of the world, I am weak. I have a physical disability that is very visible. I use my wheelchair when I leave my house, and I need hands-on help every day. But these exact weaknesses, they make me strong, and these limits, they teach me how to be an advocate for myself. And since I was born with my disability, I've always said I have a mindset of I'm normal. Like everything I do feels normal to me. I do what my brothers do, I do what my friends do, and in childhood, well, at first I should say I've been in the same church my whole life, except for my college years when I actually went away to college just like everyone else, and then I moved back home to my hometown and my home church. So in childhood, I did what my brothers and friends did. I went to youth group, I went to youth retreats, I stayed up all night at the lock-in we had one time. So whatever was happening, I was there even if I wasn't actively participating. And I would say that even back then, I didn't really dwell on my disability. I just did what I could, and that seemed like enough at the time. But I would say now, self-advocacy is really about doing more than what feels like just enough. It's about like learning to thrive with our limits. So growing up, like after college, I moved back home, and I would say throughout my 20s, I guess my story started to change a bit. I needed to find a new level of self-advocacy. So basically, let's say, what does self-advocacy mean, and what does it really look like? Like the overall thing is speaking up, but it doesn't really begin with speaking. It has to begin with an awareness, and that awareness starts with myself. I have to have a deeper sense of myself about these limits, and I have to acknowledge that my limits exist, and I need to face them in a way to understand them and find a way around my limits so that I can thrive and like love my whole life. And limits of all kinds really exist, and we can't always change them. And they can be physical, they can be mental, relational, they can be emotional or spiritual. But we can reframe the way we look at our limitations. And I would also say that reaching the end of my 20s and approaching my 30th birthday is kind of a milestone time where I started to face my limits in a new way, because there really is a difference in living life with a physical disability between childhood and adulthood. You're not surrounded by the same people at school all the time, every day. You're not going to all the youth group events together. In a lot of ways, your church interactions are very scattered to Sunday mornings or whenever your worship services happen, or specific church events. And so throughout your 20s, your friendships do change also. And I was starting to see I had to do something a little bit different. My friends were changing also, just like everyone else do. So I had to think about how can I do things a little bit differently for childhood versus adulthood. And so I started to see my reality as I turned 30, and I started to recognize my limits. And I would say, like arthropsychosis brings the obstacles in my everyday. I can't change that fact or hide that fact, but I can live well with the things I can't erase. So by turning 30 and entering a new decade, what can I do? Where can I serve? Especially, like, what can I do in my church besides just be there and be present? And so one thing I started was a small group with a group of friends, and then another thing I started was teaching preschool kids. But the funny thing is, no one really asked me to do that. I was just hanging out with a friend one day, and she got a phone call, and they were asking her to teach. And I was like, hey, can I do that with you? I want to do that. I like kids. They generally like me. Because I have a joke that a lot of times kids and dogs are drawn to me. So I was like, I want to try this thing, and we did. And then I continued to teach for 4 years. I moved up with my kids. They were 3-year-olds, and they were 4-year-olds, and they were 5-year-olds. And they were my kids. I called them my kids. I pretended like they were my kids. And the kids actually taught me a lot in the process. They aren't afraid to ask questions. They would ask me questions specifically like, why are your arms so skinny? And I would answer, well, I was not born with as many muscles. God made us all different. Another one would say, and your hands are so small. Yes, but they can still do many of the same things as your hands. And then one child said, oh, you can walk. I was just talking about walking at home. So a lot of times I use my wheelchair when I leave the house. And so half my church probably thinks I can't walk. And so I answered the child, I said, yes, I can walk with some help. How about I bring my walker one week and I'll show you. And so one Sunday I did. I took my walker and I took it into the class with kids, and they were all like, wow, this is really cool. And even last couple months ago, some friends were at my house and they hadn't really seen my walker either. And they were like, wow, what is this cool thing? And we were talking about it. A lot of times I don't need it outside the house because I have my wheelchair. But they really thought it was a really cool piece of equipment, and it helps me to be more mobile and not have to ask, hey, can you walk me to that chair over there or something. So these kids were asking me questions, and that in my head made me think, if these kids are asking me questions, I'm sure adults would ask these questions or something similar. Because a lot of my friends at the time were newer friends, and I didn't grow up with them, so there's so many things they didn't know about my day-to-day life with a disability. And so I was trying to be a writer at the time, but I wasn't fully embracing it. But one summer I realized June 30th is arthrogryposis awareness day. That's the condition I had when I was born with it. So I finally was like, ooh, I can do something to celebrate. And I had the idea to ask for people to send me questions about anything related to disability or arthrogryposis. And I would do a question and answer series on my blog for that month, or the month of July. And that actually started new conversations with my new friends. They said they were afraid to ask me certain questions because they didn't want to offend me, or they didn't know how, or their space just didn't happen. I mean, you can only talk so much on a Sunday morning in passing. So I got questions, and one blog idea turned into 4 weeks of answering 12 different questions. And that helped me to put my own thoughts into words, and it really explained, this is what life with a disability looks like, this is what my day looks like, this is what it's like to have a caregiver come in for part of the day, or this is what it's like to teach the kids in Sunday school. So I started to just build awareness at my own church, because I finally saw, like, yeah, I need to be more willing to talk also, and give them the space to talk with me, not just wonder these things in jump right into that and they don't really ask me about, do I want to be healed or how would I like prayer? And that's not the first answer I would ever really give. There are so many other answers I would answer to say, how can I pray for you? And disability would not be even on that list. I would say I'm not praying for a different story, for a different body, or a different way to serve our good God, because this is who I am, and I am who I am because of every piece of my journey, and I'm not less than because I have arthritis. And there's plenty that I can do. And also recently, I'm in a Sunday school class with adults, and I had another layer of a revelation as far as, yeah, my disability is a gift, because in a lot of ways the world is full of brokenness and signs of things not as they should be. So I wear mine on the outside. I have visible evidence, but we also need these reminders, because if we didn't have these reminders or feel weakness or see weakness, as according to the world's definition, we also wouldn't know that we need God and we need His strength. And there's a verse in 2 Corinthians 12, 9, and 10. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. And then it ends, for when I am weak, then I am strong. And one definition of disability is a lack of adequate power, strength, or physical or mental ability. Looking at that definition, we all have limits in some way, and we all lack power to do or to make it through this life well, and we all need Jesus and each other. I would say my disability makes me rely on God that much more, and to know I definitely can't do life alone. I need my church, and I need it to be the place where I feel the most welcomed and accepted, and we should be a community that focuses on what really matters. People, not perceived inabilities, not the limits, whether they are visible or invisible. Much of my story is also connected to my church, the people I meet within the walls, how I am included, and the way the community grows beyond the building. The church should also be the place where we see inclusion done well, because this is really where inclusion begins outside of the family's home. And it extends outside of the worship service as we learn to bridge the gap and love each other as whole people. So if I was to summarize the self-advocacy part in 3 little points, I would say number 1 is awareness. And that says I am aware of my limits. I'm aware of my needs. Number 2 is ability. I am able, I can do things, and I know how to ask for help. And number 3 would be the action part. I take action because I am aware, because I have ability, and I have value, and I know how to welcome others into my world.